Welcome to ManaSota-88's program on the environment. Tonight we're very fortunate in having Laurie Macdonald, President of the League of Conservation Voters, with us. Thanks for being with us, Laurie. Just getting right into it, since we're going to have two guests tonight, tell us about what the League of Conservation Voters is.
Well, the League is an environmental political action committee. There is a national organization, and then we have a Florida chapter of it, and there are some locals. The purpose of the League is to monitor our elected officials and to select those that we think have the best environmental record and the best promise for voting on good environmental legislation, and to let the voting public know about that, and to do endorsements to let the public know.
When you talk about monitoring, what type of monitoring are you referring to?
Well, we do it in a couple ways. We do have volunteers who sit in on the legislative session, both on the large floor votes, but also in the committees and the subcommittees, and actually record the actions of the different legislators, because we have a lot of difficulty if we just look at the votes of the legislators, because the votes these days seem to be pretty homogenized. They're all voting as a block. In the subcommittee and committee meetings, you can see who is really speaking for the legislation or who is really speaking against it.
In other words, when somebody actually guts the law in the subcommittee and then votes for it on the floor, you're able to tell the difference.
That's right.
Yeah, well, that's good, because that's always bothered me, that some people I felt got credit that perhaps didn't deserve it. I think a number of our local people here have received your endorsement. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, there's several of them. We have in the race with Ed Chiles and McKay, we have endorsed Chiles.
Ed Chiles.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Mr. Locker running against Peggy Simone. And then in the race between Shirley Brown and Jennings, Shirley Brown is the person we've endorsed.
And who have you endorsed for governor? I'm sure we're all interested in other cabinet spots.
Well, after due deliberation, we have endorsed the Chiles-McKay team. Also in state races in the cabinet, we have some endorsements. We've endorsed Jim Minter for Secretary of State. We've endorsed Bob Crawford for Commissioner of Agriculture. And we're endorsing Betty Castor for Commissioner of Education.
It interests me, in the case, say, of Jim Locker, who's not run for public office before, how do you determine who are you going to endorse in the case of where they're not incumbents?
Mm-hmm. A couple things have gone into the decision. He does have a philosophy that is consistent with good environmental protection. He's actually involved himself, like with the Boy Scouts locally, in teaching the children environmental education. So these things speak well for him. We did a questionnaire. We sent out questionnaires to all of the people in the state races, and we've evaluated those. He had a good response to our questions on the questionnaire. And then another thing that went into that race was looking at the incumbent and what kind of a record do we have for the incumbent. And in this case, looking at our scorecard or evaluation with Simone, she had pretty low score. I believe she had, on a scale of 1 to 5, in terms of leadership and bill activity, like sponsorship of bills, she just rated a 2, and just an average on floor votes.
Were there any ones? I'm just curious.
Oh, in this area, I don't believe so, but we certainly did have some ones around the state.
Through the state.
Yeah.
And how about Ed Chiles? Did you judge him on using the same criteria? Or?
Similar. He has, again, shown that his voting will be consistent with good environmental legislation. He has memberships, and has had for a long time, in several organizations that are of outdoor nature. I think he's been pretty involved in Ducks Unlimited and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think something else of a lot of interest to our voters and viewers tonight, too, are the proposed amendments to the Constitution. And I don't think a lot of attention has been focused on those. Can you tell us a little bit about the amendments? And I know you've already discussed one that you don't want to talk about too much, but tell us about the amendments and what the League's position is.
There are two that we have taken a position on. One of them is the referendum number 3, which is an amendment which would, in a sense, leave the local government without taking real responsibility that they need to for implementing and funding environmental legislation, among other legislation. And then amendment or referendum number 4 is the one that deals with open government. This is real important for the LCV process in a sense.
LCV again being League of Conservation Voters,
League
right?
of Conservation Voters.
Yeah.
We, I was mentioning that we do our evaluations in part on the voting record, but that isn't always easy to do because in some instances the votes aren't even recorded, and with the passage of Amendment 4 or Referendum 4, it would mean there'd be an open government. Meetings would be open to the public, and meetings of all the legislators would be open to the public, and the votes of the legislators would all be recorded.
So you would be able to have people there watching and to let us know what goes on behind the scenes, not just the final vote.
That's right. Behind the scenes is a real important place where decisions and plans get made, and we want to be able to be there so that we can hold our elected officials accountable.
How do you go deal with the issue of aides? And aides these days are making so many decisions for, say, the cabinet members and the legislators too. And I'm sure those won't be covered. Their discussions won't necessarily be covered by public law.
That's true. And in a sense, I think of working with the legislative aides more in a lobbying sense. And the League of Conservation Voters is not a lobbying organization. We evaluate, we endorse elected officials, but we don't actually lobby elected officials. The aides are a really, really important part of how decisions get made, but we are not evaluating.
Okay, we're down to about 2 minutes before our visitor, Senator Lawton Chiles, comes in. And would you just tell us a little bit about how we can benefit from the League and what it's done today?
Yeah, in fact, I brought a couple things to show you. The League publishes scorecards. They're called there's the National Environmental Scorecard, done, of course, by the National League of Conservation Voters. This is the 1991 right here, and it has like a report card on our congressional people, our senators and representatives, and then our Florida League of Conservation Voters publishes the environmental report on the state of the legislature. And throughout the state, if you are interested in finding out how your representative or your senator voted and how well they did with regard to sponsoring good environmental legislation or how bad they were, just contact us and we'll get you a copy of this, and you can see our evaluation and use it in your own deliberations for who you vote for.
Laurie, thanks for being with us, and we'll be back in just a minute with one of the League of Conservation Voters' endorsements in the flesh, Senator Lawton Chiles.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome back to ManaSota-88's program on the environment. We're extremely fortunate tonight in having Senator Lawton Chiles with us. We appreciate your being here, Senator.
Thank you.
And as Laurie Macdonald pointed out, Senator Chiles received the League of Conservation Voters endorsement, and I think has been endorsed by virtually every environmentalist in the state. And just real quickly mentioning some of the more outstanding things that you've done, as you're putting the Osceola forest off limits to phosphate mining, your strong stance on offshore oil drilling, and the Florida Barge Canal, and your plans for the Everglades. And just what do you see as really the biggest problem, the greatest cause of our environmental problems in Florida?
Well, Gloria, I think the growth is, and what happens is we just continue to, to impinge on our limited, finite resources of water and space, and certainly a lot of the natural things that we have. I think that's one of our great problems, and certainly air and water pollution continue to be huge problems. I suspect that probably we're going to have more problems with water quality and quantity over the next few years than about anything else.
Well, I think one of the things that you've said that has interested me so is your approach to growth, and perhaps you'd like to tell our viewers about it.
Fine. Well, what we've been saying is that Florida is going to continue to grow. We can't put a fence up around it, much as some of us would maybe like to. But the question is, should we have an economy that is sort of geared to have growth? And that's kind of what we have now. the base of our economy being sort of tourism and growth, we literally, you know, we have a recession when we don't grow over 5 or 10%, and that's bad. So we think that rather than wait till we totally hit the wall, we should be diversifying our economy as quickly as we can, trying to grow businesses off of what we have here. Again, we want to provide good jobs, good high-paying jobs, good skilled jobs for our children and for our people. But I think we can do that much better if we promote sort of our businesses internally so that they have better productivity, their workers earn more pay, they get you know, better profits, than to try to attract smokestacks and other industries here. Our strategy from the 60s, and we really haven't changed it, was let's sell low wages, low taxes, and sunshine. And we're still sort of in that strategy. That's what our Department of Commerce still sort of attempts to do. We think we ought to put together the Department of Commerce and the Department of Community Affairs, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Regulation, and the Department of Natural Regulation. When I say put them together, I mean they ought to operate off of one general plan, one strategy. Right now they're operating off of 5 strategies, and one is going in one direction, one is going the other.
I think that's a very good point. And what do you see? Obviously, we are going to do something about the direction that the Florida Department of Environmental Regulation is moving in, but how do you see that you can change that most effectively?
Well, I think if we put quality professional people in there, and if we give them the, you know, the assets to be able to do their job, as a lot of people have told me, Florida has very good environmental laws. It's just that we don't do anything about enforcing them, and they're not enforced equally. It's interesting, as I've been out campaigning, I hear from all kind of little people that are harassed as they attempt to, you know, to do things on their property and all, and it's usually very, very kind of small things, and yet I see all of the big developers can usually through their lawyers can accomplish whatever they want to accomplish. So, you know, it's kind of a backward situation. Instead of looking at things that really could degrade our environment, it looks like no attention is paid there, and yet in some ways the you know, smaller people feel that you know, they can't get anything decided, or they're continually harassed.
Do you think that we'll be able, jumping to another subject, to control offshore oil drilling and its effect on our coast?
Well, I think we'll only do it with the help of the Congress. It's obvious that we're not going to get the kind of help we want from the President. And I understand, and we're very fortunate, in the bill that went up, Ted Stevens and Bennett Johnson had taken out the moratorium provision. Fortunately, it was caught by Bob Graham and others, and after Ted Stevens and them left for the night, they put it back in. But that's what happens when you get into these, you know, very late night sessions that you have to worry about. But you know, I'm concerned that only 10% of our coast is exempted, and California got 90% of their coast exempted, and yet ours is only for a period of years now, even the 10%. I want to see that permanent, and I think that we ought to, you know, go for the 100-mile buffer zone as well. And I think it's ridiculous to talk about Florida paying back for leases that the federal government granted.
Right, and what do you see? I know you have a great interest in the Everglades, and what do you see as a possible solution to that problem?
Well, I think that, you know, a governor that sort of says we're going to sit the parties down, we want to set some kind of a time table. We want to find out, you know, scientifically, and I think that's how we ought to make these decisions on best scientific knowledge. What should the water quality standards be, and how do we, you know, sort of accomplish that, and then see that that people responsible pay their fair share.
And I know too that you are very concerned about our children and our future citizens when they're grown, and how do you see the environment playing a part in that?
Well, obviously the great thing we have here is our wonderful environment and its recreational values and other values, but But also we have to worry now about all of the toxic problems, and we know that those problems cause learning disabilities, those poisons, and all kind of disabilities that way. So I think we have to have a much greater concern now than we used to have. I think that we've got to really start looking at recycling and sort of product makeup, and start putting a cost. If you're going to use a product that degrades the environment, let's add a cost on it to start with, so we've got something to kind of clean it up, to make a penalty there to try to drive the use off of the fluorocarbons and all of the other things that we have to work with. The other thing is, I think the state can do a lot in trying to create the market for recycled products. They tell me now that many agencies of state government will not buy some of the recycled post, and their excuse is that people will steal the post. Well, that's not a very good excuse, I don't think. But if the state required or said we're going to buy these recycled posts, then you develop a market for them, and then the price of doing those will come down, because we know anytime you can do something in quantity, you bring the cost down. And I think we need to find that for many of these products. We know guardrails can be done with recycled materials, all of those things that the state uses so much. And if we just start putting in all of our contracts, you've got to use these kind of materials, we're going to create a market for the recycled products.
That certainly sounds encouraging too. And what about energy conservation when we think of the new Clean Air Act?
Well, I think that probably it's more predominantly a federal program and the research and monies, but I think there are ways that the state could encourage, and in Florida we certainly can encourage solar research and solar use, and I think we certainly ought to do that. The tragedy to be is, in the Carter era, when we had the last oil embargo, we really embarked on trying to find some alternate sources of energy. When Reagan came in, he just knocked all of that out. Now, there was some waste in that program. I'm not going to say that we didn't waste some money, but we were trying to find all kind of different ways of biomass, thermal currents, tidal currents, geothermal heat, all kind of things to try to find some renewable sources. I'm convinced that if we put the time and attention, like we were putting a man on the moon, we could come up with these reusable sources, and most of them are nature's way, and so they're not degrading to the environment. That's what we've got to do.
And what do you see when elected governor as your number one priority to begin with, not just about the environment, but just generally, because they all fit together?
I think they do all fit together, and I think that ethics has to be sort of number one, because part of that is trying to reestablish the confidence of people in their government. And I think, without their confidence, so many things we do have to be done on a voluntary basis of our citizens, whether it's collecting the tax or many things. So I think the governor's role is trying to see that we come up with the kind of ethical standards. I think part of that, we think, is how you run the campaign sets the stage, and that's why we limited our contributions and trying to run our campaign in a different way. I want to see us have statewide funding, public funding for our statewide races. That law is on the books, but we never funded it. To me, that's the cheapest tax dollar you can spend. But with that, and I think it should be matching contributions, but limit those contributions. Everybody maybe can't do it at $100 like I can, but if there's matching contributions, let's limit it to $500 contributions to be matched. Then I think we can take some of the big money out of it. There certainly should be a no-gift law for the legislature. We've got to get this travel with lobbyists out. I think the legislature is ready to see its act cleaned up too. I think many of them feel very badly about what's happening, and certainly we need to set those kind of standards. But again, the governor sets that with how he conducts his office. We certainly want our agency heads to agree that they won't be in some revolving door situation where they'll be outside lobbying the same people they're in charge of, all of those things. So I think that'll have to come first.
No, well, we've certainly seen evidence of both of those to our detriment, that is not being able to get the same attention paid to our very sincere, well-researched concerns, and the fact that we often do deal with a regulator one week and the next month he's out in the private sector, again subverting perhaps some good environmental rules. So that would be a welcome relief. Laurie, do you have anything that you'd like to ask the Senator about?
Well, a comment I wanted to make is that a lot of good government does depend on the trust that you have, that you're going to be listened to, that you have access to your elected official, whether it's the governor or state rep or your local representative, and that we really look forward to having that access to your office. And I think that you've demonstrated that by actions in the past and just recently when you ask people to come up and tell you more about their concerns. Appreciated that meeting.
Well, we certainly look forward to having an open office. That's always the way my Senate office was, and we certainly want the governor's office to be the same way.
Bringing up just a sort of unpleasant subject just briefly, I don't know how much time you've been able to allocate to taking a look at phosphate mining in the state, and something we've been working on for about 12 years, but we look forward to working with you on that issue too. The second report to Congress just came out, and in there they did finally, EPA finally conceded, well, yes, phosphogypsum and gypsum ponds really are hazardous waste, but we can't afford to regulate them. We have to depend upon the states, and I think that may well be true. So we will look forward to your being at the helm and maybe protecting our groundwater resources. But anyway, I'd like to thank both of you for being our guests tonight, and particularly you, Senator Chiles, because I know you had a busy afternoon with your $1.50 hot dog fundraising, or not fundraising, $1.50 hot dog availability as opposed to about a $500 fee, I think, for another meeting that was taking place in town.
We had a big crowd out and we had a lot of fun.
Well, it's great, and thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in Tallahassee soon. Thanks, Laurie.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you all for being with us tonight. Next week, we look forward to having Ed Chiles as our guest. Good night.